Hello again, folks. KR King here, ready and willing to help you homebrew your own D&D campaign. So as I promised last week, today I am going to be using sort of the old school hex mapping techniques to create a continent map suitable for a campaign. But I'm going to be doing this with the functionality and aesthetic quality that you get with a software package, specifically in this case, the Wonderdraft package. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an overall shoreline map of the major land mass and some of the island masses around that. Then I'm going to focus in on the area that the players are going to begin in. If it's the opening of a campaign, they're going to be first level, maybe third, but they're not going to go a great distance. That's where I'm going to concentrate this on. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a known world map for the players that you can use so that they can map out your world using that old school hex style map making process. So the intent here is to think of your map as a gameplay tool. The hexes are going to give you a sense of distances, how much movement you players can do in a day depending on their mode of travel, the difficulty, and then within that hex what might live there, and this sort of thing. But also this sort of map with these terrain symbols denoting, soil and water and terrain, really what they denote is the richness of your imagination, which is quite a thing. All right, folks, I'm going to dive right in to the computer, but I want a little disclaimer before I start. I shot this video with the latest version of Wonderdraft, 1.6.1, I think it's called, and I found some bugs. I couldn't export to PNG or JPEG. When I made a detail map, the paths didn't show up for some reason. Now, I don't know if it was my fault, I didn't know something, or it's in the software. I went back to the older version, which was 1.4.1 or something like that, and everything worked fine. So that's the version that I used in this video. Okay, let's go inside. All right, here we have the Wonderdraft 1.1.4, and we are going to start new. I am going to use what is the 4K Ultra HD. The reason is that gives me 3840 by 2160 pixels. That's what I want to have a large enough map when I create my hex structure to have a pretty fair size area. So it's going to load the various defaults. Okay, this is our size here, and when we put our overlay on, our hexes, and I use 28, and the reason I do that is it's very transferable to Fantasy Grounds, that's the virtual tabletop, but also it gives me quite a bit of area. If I have these hexes as 6 miles, this basically gives me about 980 by 470 or something like that. If you want to see what that is, if we use our trace tool, basically you're going to see this is about, let's see, maybe a little smaller because I calculated this all out. Belgium, coast of France to Budapest, Belgium to, so that's quite an area there of territory, right? Okay. You could make this scale larger, especially because the detail maps go to 2, 3, and 4 times. You could go up to 24 miles to the hex. There you'd have a size, basically the width and height of Russia, 3,800 miles by 1,800 miles, something like that. The issue you're going to have there is 24-mile hexes. That's going to be very, you can break those down into detail maps, but why not have maps that are accurate to the movement rate? Also, they're too big. With a 6-mile hex, you can actually break that down into much smaller increments. For instance, if the players need to know where a castle is within a hex or a city, it's much more useful. And the detail maps are separate maps, as we'll see. So that's why I'm using the 6 miles and this size map. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is change my theme because I want to be able to see the water clearly. So when I use this worn, I like this because I can really see. And now I'm going to create my land masses. This is obviously a sample. I'm doing this very quickly. You may want to take a lot more time. What I have found is when you create a landmass, doesn't matter how quick you do it or whatever, it takes on a life of its own. It becomes this thing. So I'm just going to draw using this just the standard brush tool with and I'm just going to create a shape. I don't know, something like this, right? Like that. And I know that looks crazy, but you'll see when we make this more fractal. It'll look more interesting. I'll have an island here, maybe one here, over here, and down here. Okay. Now I'm going to use my Fractal Tool, and I'm going to go in here, depending on the roughness and the size, and I'm just going to go like this, and this is going to make this more like real coastline. And I'm going to do that all through this whole thing. I'll go into fast motion here. Notice when I'm doing this, you can come out and create, peninsulas or different shapes. Those are, by the way, that's sea. Those aren't lakes if you leave water behind. Okay, and so now I'm going to go into my fast motion. All right, now another cool little feature here that you have is creating islands with just going like this. And I kind of like this because you can make them bigger, but you can also just sort of make a little islands. And these can be really interesting spots, pirates or, who knows what on these islands. I just like to have them. I've always liked islands, when we were a kid, Treasure Island or whatever. So I like to make them. How realistic any of this geography is, I have no idea, right? Doesn't matter. Okay, now we're going to use our removal tool, and we're going to create some removal. Now notice I have this bay, so this is a natural sort of item for civilization already. Maybe I'll have down here in the south some additional ones, and you just create these as natural sort of border lines of your, right? And maybe one up here. Okay. And they can go in and kind of expand on that. This is, people are going to gather in these bays as in terms of civilization because it's protected, right, from the ravages of the ocean, and the weather is better there when you get in, it gets moderated. All right. And maybe one like that. So here's my central landmass, and I have already this natural area here where we could have coast. Now this is a pretty big sea in here, but let's just say this is what we're going to use as our main area for our map, right? So, well, they're going to know settlements, right? They're going to know where people around, if this is the central bay, where they live. So let's just start. And I'll start with this logical right here. And what I'm going to do, I think, is I'm going to put this here. And then I'm going to just make sure that the land goes right to there so that I have that. Okay. And a little bit. Okay. So now I got, this is, maybe this is the starting city, maybe not. Then I'm going to put some other cities in here, right? Whether they're allies, competitors, whatever. And the question, of course, is how far away do people live? You're using this hex mile, 6 mile hexes. Is it a day's journey? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4? That's 24. Maybe in clear or road you go 30. Would you just put it like right here? Would you go in the other direction? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's say we go like that, and then we can take our land tool and we can remove some of this to put that on the coast. That's one way to do it. Another way, especially if you've got kind of, depending on, that would be, especially if it's unsafe to travel at night, which it often was, that's how close people are going to be. You could also take this symbol and you could move it, say, to here, 2 days travel, and then you could make, whether it would be a village, or what I sometimes like to do is I'll put a keep here. Some guy has, this is it's a way station, but it's protected, and there's a keep there, and there's a divide. Okay. And then what you want to do is, let's see, you've got 3 cities. Do you want to make more? I'm going to make more. I'm going to have another community down here. And maybe here. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a little bit ways away. So maybe I'll move that a little closer. 1, 2. And then, of course, paths. We're going to have road networks. Let's see here. Road, what color? I think I'm going to have a little more brown. Okay. And I'm going to create a road. 1, 2, 3, 4. Boom, like that. And then I'm going to have ones here. All right, this is the known world. Let's just have this, just for this example. I would probably spend a little more time on this, but again, I'm trying to do this for an example. So I'm going to label these towns because people are going to know what these are called. Okay. Now, one of the things is you can just say, Land's End or something like that, although that would probably be something over here or something. One of the things that the system does is it has this name generator down here. You can pick settlements or bodies of water. So it will just give you names. So let's say I say, okay, Decawood. Sounds good. Then I'm going to say here again. All right, Galemouth. And here, Gildenverth. All right. And then down here, Vulcanwick. These names again. I probably could come up with cleverer ones just sitting here, but I'm just going to use these. And then I have this keep. So let's see what this will come up. Oh, I had one. Shoot. All right, Pincer Keep is going to be. And I'm going to say Pincer's Keep. Okay. And of course, this body of water here. What is this? So we go to body of water. Somber Gulf. Sounds good. Any of these, if you want to make them bigger, you just go to your font size, right? Go like that, and you say font size bigger, smaller. Whoops, that's a little too small. Death Island. This is kind of silly, but if you put that on a map, this will be something the players are interested in. Again, that's a little bit of a sale out there. Okay. Now, we're obviously going to have rivers and mountains and things, and we're going to develop those. But what we're going to do for purposes of this is how much do the players know about, let's say they know this kind of area. They know this is out there. What do they know about it? Maybe nothing. Maybe they just know this island is here and have this sense. And they know about these little islands. But again, they don't really know what the terrain is like. So what you do, first of all, we have to save. We're going to save as video map. And I went a long ways without saving there. Don't recommend that, but I do it all the time. Because if you crash, you're going to be just bummed. Then I'm going to make a detailed map. This is going to be 4 times the size. Select an area, and I'm basically going to just pick right here. Create this map. Okay, here you go. Now, what I'm going to do is change my overlay to reflect the real one, which is the size of these is 28 times 4, 112. Now, these reflect the distances that we had here, right? It's a accurate map of this. So I'm going to change my theme to black and white. Now I have a map that I can give them. They know these features. And I would probably name this. Now I can go in and make changes to this, as you'll see, because we're going to add some features here on our map, and then we're going to have those changes reflected on this map. We save this known world because we may make changes to this. We are probably as we create our world. Okay. Go back to our original. All right. So obviously this is the area that we're going to be making, sort of filling out the terrain. And then whatever is known, you'll see. Remember, anytime you can turn off the overlay, You can turn off the labels if you want. Maybe they get in the way or something, which is kind of nice. Okay, any of these, the symbols, obviously we do want these on here. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to keep this hex on because, again, I'm using this as a gameplay device. I want to see what these distances are. So what's kind of the terrain that we're going to have? One of the things I like to do, and this is just my personal preference, I like to create sort of a topographical sense of, so along the coast, I will sort of create a shade. Like this, just along the coastline. And these are coastal hexes. They are affected by the weather patterns that are along the coast. Then I'm going to have, what's this inner here? What's going on in here? And I like sort of having maybe on the one side it's very wet, you know, so I'll make a color here of that. And then I'll sort of say, oh, I'll put some hills in here. Now, this is where the hex. If I go like that, that's a hill hex, right? This is clear unless I say otherwise. And maybe what you say is, you know, and this is where the ocean, it's not necessarily like desert or something, it's just dry. Once you've done this, you may want to give these a different color. You may want to say, and if you just pick those, what grows in here might be a certain kind of tree. I tend to create, if I've got this green kind of shade, I will have the same kind of tree. Again, I'm going by the hex. You can now distribute these trees if you like. Depending on your placement rate and your density, you can just go like this, right? Well, the issue there is you've got this hex structure, you know, what is going to be the movement rate, what is going to be the difficulty of that terrain. So if you're saying that this, let me go to my symbol pick, a single tree is a, you know, light forest. If I've got two trees in a hex, that is heavy forest, more difficult, harder to see, that sort of thing. If you want to maintain that, you got to be a little more careful when you distribute these so that you, when you're looking at this map, knows what you're looking at, right? If this is light forest, then using that distribution thing might be a little, you know, not clear enough, not, you know, not as, so let me, the center goes up against the hills, and you might even have, you know, you might even want to do sort of a, we used to do this all the time, forest hill hex. That's very, you know, dense. Okay, so now you've got this forest up here, created by this, you know, rain shield thing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this as the master map. And the reason that I'm doing this is if I want to go back to my known world map that I created, again, you can just wait to the very end of this and create this. Or you can open up your known world map, okay? And then you can trace, let's see, your master map. Bring that over. It'll line right up with your thing. Do the players know about this? Do they know that these are, you know, that a little bigger. The hills of Gramos. I don't know. Dark forest, that classic, you know, silly example, like so. Okay, if I turn my overlay off, that's what's there. We know there's hills there, we know there's a dark forest, but we don't have a map as a player, a detailed map. How do I get that? I have to leave wherever the starting city is, and I have to wander out into the wilderness to get that map. And I want to have some mountains. Now, again, the realism of mountains, how many hexes they take up, you don't have to worry about too much, obviously to a certain extent, but mountain, maybe like this big, okay? And I can again use the spread feature if I want to have a spine like that detailed, or undo if I want to be sort of more like this, where it creates different ones, right? However you want to make those, okay? That's quite a mountain range, right? But that's going to divide one side from the other because and then of course, maybe you want to have hills next to it. So you just denote these, they're much smaller. You're going to denote these as hills. So you got hill hexes in here leading up to the mountains, and maybe you have them on the other side as well. Okay. And then what I like to do is create a color, just like I did before, my topographical thing, color for my mountains. This was hills, remember? This gray, so I'll use that. Then I want a color for my mountains, maybe like that, a darker gray than the one I had. Let's try that. So what I could do is I could have a desert over here. And what's my desert color going to be? Let's try that. All right, and so this is a rain shadow creating a desert over here. And then on this side, what is going to be our major terrain type? This is going to be just kind of clear with some occasional tree or something yellowy. All right, let's just say that that is our standard sort of terrain. And you might, looking at this, I might reverse this and have this as the forest, right? Let's say I wanted to do that. I said, you know what, I'd rather have this as the forest. Well, pick this, go in here, and then go back to this. This is for your trees. And then I would clean this up with... Another thing that I'll do is if I have this as my standard sort of terrain type, this savanna, I'll create some trees that are specific to that. Because I'd use this, so let's say this one, and occasional, same sort of in terms of movement and difficulty of the terrain, things hiding, and maybe you have two there. I just like to do that to say, oh, that's a different kind of a terrain. The different, it's again, this shadow of these hills, this is heavy forest, this is kind of more light, whatever. So the last thing I'm going to talk about in this video is rivers, creating rivers. How do you want to have them? Do you want to have them through hexes or along? Let's say you have a river coming. You're going to say, I'm just going to go through hexes. There's two ways to do it. And the most is, let's say you're going to start up here in this hex, and you're going to come along, and you're going to go like this. There you go. And then you can change the appearance of that. Okay. Now, if you go along a hex side, for example, and the reason I'm just showing this because sometimes it can be, some people just like to follow hexes. In the modern thing, when you look at this without the overlay, it's not like the hex thing is super unrealistic. In fact, it's kind of an interesting thing. The question is just whether you want to divide these hexes. Are they in or out of a water hex? I tend to kind of like the hex thing, even though this is how I used to use it when I made hex maps, because it creates a river hex with all the kind of river hex sort of stuff. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to use this. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that the land changes slightly right? It becomes a little, you know, it's reflected in that river, right? It's a little more, you know, I don't know, rich with, you know, the plant life and everything there, sort of like that. And then I'm going to have my standard, you know, savanna type thing here. And then the other element is there sort of a localized, the weather comes off the ocean, and as it rises, it kind of circulates because you have this, and you have some sort of really lush thing in here, right? And so perhaps you also then would have your heavy forest. And again, if it's different than that one, do you want another kind of tree to reflect that, you know, and just like so. All right. And then, of course, when you turn this off, this overlay, you start to see this map as it would just appear without this if you're going to print this off. All right, so that's kind of a basic, simple example. All right, there you have it. Obviously, I could fill in all sorts of stuff and think about what's in all the various hexes and the cities and who lives there and that, which is the fun of creating your own world. But that's just to give you an example of how to use Wonderdraft using that old school hex mapping style, thinking about those 6-mile hexes as you're building your map. So if you like what you've seen, please subscribe to my channel. I'm always looking for more. I also love to hear comments, and I always answer them. But most importantly, my friends, keep playing D&D and tell somebody else about it.